to my channel. Today I'm doing a book video. I don't think I've ever done a book wrap up of like a month before. Over the past few years I've started to read a lot more, and so I thought I'd start doing some more bookish kind of content. I love reading, I love watching videos about people reading. Hi Martha! And January and February were alright reading months for me. I never usually read, I usually read like 3 books in a month or something, and in January and February I read 9 books I think, including 1 audiobook. So I thought I'd go through them all, tell you what I thought. I'm going to rate each one out of 5. I've got 5-star books here and I've got 0-star books here, so this might be of interest to you, and if it is then keep watching. I don't know whether to do it best to worst or worst to best. I think I'm going to do best to worst. So best to worst, we're starting with The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This book is by the same author that did Daisy Jones and the Six, which I've never actually read, but it was super popular and loads of people really loved it. It's about a woman called Evelyn Hugo, and obviously she has 7 husbands, and it's about a young girl who goes to interview Evelyn Hugo, and Evelyn Hugo tells the girl, I want you to write my autobiography, which is like a huge deal. She's like the biggest actress in the world, and it's basically uncovering all of her 7 stories of all of her different marriages. Just could not put this book down, and when it was finished I kept thinking about it and kept thinking, like when I was reading a new book, like this isn't Evelyn Hugo. I just loved Evelyn as a character, and I loved Monique as a character, who's the person that went to do the interview. A lot of complexities, there's some LGBT storylines in here, just absolutely amazing. Such a good book for lockdown times, completely just took me into another world and just really couldn't put it down. Like I woke up at like 3 in the morning like I need to read more. Just amazing, really loved this. This was my first 5 out of 5-star book. My next 5-star book was My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This was an incredibly hard read, but I just was mesmerised by it. I thought the writing was absolutely amazing, the content was horrifying, and I think that Kate Russell wrote the horrifyingness really well. It's about a girl who's 15 who has an affair with her teacher, and the story jumps from her as a 32-year-old woman kind of rethinking what happened to her at 15, and then back to her as a 15-year-old and her growing up, having this relationship with this teacher who is obviously I think like 20 or 30 years older than her, and just loads of uncoverings. The teacher is then accused of sexual abuse to other pupils, and she herself doesn't feel like what happened to her was abuse. And so I just thought it was a really interesting and amazing way of showing what abuse might feel like to a young woman. I think there's a lot of young women that might be abused in that way, that might not see it as abuse themselves. Maybe they feel like, oh, but I wanted to do it, or I, showed signs to him that maybe I would want that, or, there's just a lot in this book that kind of shows how a girl of that age might be feeling in that situation. It was obviously very uncomfortable reading at times, and definitely a massive trigger warning on it, because I haven't gone through anything this girl's gone through, but there was times where I was like, this is a lot. But I just thought it was a beautiful book, and really well written, and the cover is absolutely beautiful as well. So that was a 5 out of 5-star read. Moving on to Where the Crawdads Sing. This one has been everywhere and so many people have read it because it's just so beautiful. It follows a girl called Kaya who lives in a marsh. She's known as the marsh girl around her neighbourhood, and ends up at 7 or 8 years old living on her own in the marsh. And it's pretty much showing her growing up on the marsh and basically being raised by nature. There's some really beautiful characters in here, some really lovely relationships. Kaya has a really nice relationship with the guy that owns the local shop, and her first romances. But it's not, I feel like it was kind of one of those stories that had every genre in one. I felt like there's a little bit of romance in here, a little bit of crime in here, a bit of murder mystery, loads of gorgeous descriptions of nature, and it just kind of made me feel closer to nature reading this book. It was just so beautiful. Surprise ending as well. For anyone that's read this, let me know down in the comments and tell me Did you expect that ending? Because I certainly did not. Really beautiful book. Moving on to Matt Haig's The Midnight Library. I adore Matt Haig. I think he is a great author. My favourite of his books is Notes on a Nervous Planet. Just reading that, I was like, oh my god. First time I felt, you know, like I've read a anxiety book that actually felt close to my heart. And this one was a novel. I think it's my first ever Matt Haig novel that I've read. And it's about a girl who wants to enter life. A whole series of things happen to her that makes life really difficult for her, so she tries to end her own life, and she ends up in a place called the Midnight Library, which is kind of a place between life and death, where she gets to kind of trial loads of different lives that she could have lived. For example, at school she was a swimmer, and so she got to try out the life where she was an Olympic swimmer. She got to try out the life where she ended up with her high school boyfriend. You know, she got to try out all the different lives. I think this would be a great book for anybody that you know that might be feeling just a bit done with lockdown and life and just feeling not great at the moment. I found that it is a book I think I would pick back up at a time where I was maybe feeling not great. I just absolutely love this book. Again, Matt Haig is a great author. It wasn't my favourite of his books, but I think that's just because it was a novel rather than non-fiction. Moving on to The Wonder. This is by Emma Donoghue. This was such a strange book. I think I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. It was so weird. It was, at points it was like I wanted to put it down, but it was really intriguing and I was just desperate to know what happened. I think it's set in like, when is it set? It's set in like maybe the 1920s, something like that. It's set a really long time ago. The blurb reads, Lib Wright, a young English nurse, arrives in an impoverished Irish village on a strange mission. 11-year-old Anna O'Donnell is said to have eaten nothing for months but appears to be thriving miraculously. Lib's job is simple, to watch the girl and uncover the truth. An educated skeptic, Lib expects to expose the fast as a hoax right away, but as she gets to know the girl, she becomes more and more unsure. Is Anna a fraud or a living wonder? Or is something more sinister unfolding right before Lib's eyes? This is the same author as The Room. The Room was a really famous film as well as book. And yeah, it definitely has really big surprise twists and turns. I think I did overall really enjoy it and would recommend it, but there was just some bits that were really slow. I think the first half was a bit like, right, can you just tell me what is going on? And then when it gets into it, it really does become a really fantastic book. Definitely for the more fiction-y people that really like to go into a different land. But yeah, I did really enjoy this book, so I think I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5 if I could do that. Am I allowed to do that? I think I am. Moving on to The Loney. This is by Andrew Michael Hurley. This was a strange book, I think because I read it part on audiobook and part actually physically reading it. And for parts I would listen to the audiobook and read along with this book. It's about two brothers, one mute, the other his lifelong protector. Year after year their family visits the same sacred shrine on a desolate strip of coastline known as the Loney, in desperate hope of a cure. In the long hours of waiting, the boys are left alone. They cannot resist the causeway, revealed with every turn of the treacherous tide, the old house they glimpse at its end. Many years on, Hanny is a grown man and no longer in need of his brother's care. But then the child's body is found, and the Loney always gives up its secrets in the end. Again, I kind of felt like this was quite a stretched out book. There were times that it was very slow, but when it picked up and it got to the good bits, I did find it really good. It's quite a heavy theme of religion in this book, of Catholicism, and I was brought up when I was younger as a Catholic, so I kind of enjoyed those bits of being like, oh, I remember stuff like that happening, or not quite to this extent, but you know, just I understood the terms and stuff like that. And yeah, I'd say this probably isn't a book for everybody. I think there'd be very specific people that I recommend this to, but I kind of like reading books from all different genres, but this is one I probably wouldn't pick up again, just because it was not totally my cup of tea, but I'm glad I read it. Next, moving on to Heartburn by Nora Ephron. I actually did quite like this book. It was, you could definitely tell it wasn't written recently. It's not that old, maybe like 10, 20 years old, I'm not entirely sure. But it's basically about marriage, it's about children, it's about affairs. It definitely did make me laugh, and books don't always do that. Like, even if I think a book's funny, I probably won't laugh out loud, but there was a couple of times where I did actually laugh out loud. I really like the writing style a lot. I like the chatty nature of it. The book was also broken up into like little bits of recipes and stuff like that, because the character in this, the main character, is a chef that writes about food. So I thought that was really, like, whenever that would happen, I'd be like, right, skip. But the actual story I did quite enjoy. There was definitely times where I was like, oh, you could just tell it wasn't, there was things that were said in it that probably wouldn't be said nowadays, that were just a little bit maybe offensive, I don't know. But I did enjoy the book overall. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Another book that I read on audiobook was Ghosts by Dolly Alderton. I gave that a 3 or a 4 out of 5. It was my first audiobook I'd read all the way through, or listened to all the way through. I just way prefer reading physical books than I do audiobooks, but audiobooks are sometimes quite nice to mix things up when you're doing the dishes or whatever. It was about a girl who was ghosted after getting into a relationship for the first time in a really long time, and she really liked this guy and he completely ghosted her, and it's just telling her story about that as all her friends get into marriages and have children and get engaged and go into relationships. It's about her story dealing with being ghosted. And it's also about her family life. Her dad becomes unwell with Alzheimer's, and it's about her learning about Alzheimer's and learning how to care for her dad and her mum. And it was just, it was a very kind of normal, chatty book. I think I probably would have preferred it more if it had been physically read, because I just thought it was slightly boring. There wasn't really anything like, oh my god. It was a bit like, okay, this is very nice and very, you know, relatable to modern times dating, but I thought I would enjoy it more than I did, to be honest. And I'm moving on to my last book, which was a 1 out of 5 stars. That's Good Vibes, Good Life by Bex King. I think the reason I didn't like this so much is probably also my problem as much as this book's problem of, obviously, I suffer with anxiety, and when I'm reading a book like this, I'm looking for it to give me more than stuff that is already out there. This gave me no more than in any other book I've read. Kind of felt like a lot of it was, it's already been said by people. I think it was a book that was designed for people to Instagram. There's some like nice quotes with nice text and pictures and stuff, but I didn't feel like he was in this at all. Like, I didn't feel like there was a brief like 3 or 4 pages about his childhood, and that's why it brought him on to like researching this kind of thing, and then it was just all kind of bullshit quotes that I just didn't really like. Handling Negative People would be the title of one, and then it would just say things that, you know, anyone would say to you when you're trying to handle negative people. It wasn't very profound. Not that every book needs to be profound, but I just wouldn't recommend this to anyone, to be honest. If you read this book and enjoyed it, I'm very glad. If this can do good in the world, then that's great, but for me it was a no. Hey Martha. Yeah. Hello. Hello. Oh, gorgeous girl. So that is all the books that I read in January and February of 2021. I'd love to know if you've read any of these or what you've read in the past 2 months. I'm hopefully going to be doing this video once a month or once every couple of months. If you would like that, please let me know if you would like that. And thank you very much for watching. Bye.